What is neurodiversity?
What is it about these people?
Dyslexia.
Autism Spectrum.
ADHD.
Gifted.
Dysgraphia.
All brains are different.
It's okay to be who you are.
This is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 87. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, the author of Teaching Twice Exceptional Students in Today's Classroom and Raising Twice Exceptional Children, a handbook for parents of neurodivergent gifted kids. Today we'll be talking to Sarah Nannery and her husband Larry. Sarah was diagnosed with autism as an adult, and she will share about her experiences learning to navigate her professional world, how her husband helped her overcome the communication hurdles that she faced, and how she's now sharing that experience with you. We'll talk to Sarah and Larry in a minute, so stay where you are. As the world starts to cautiously open back up and begin the slow return to normal, my calendar's filling up with both virtual and in-person events. One of the things that I do is provide continuing education and consultations with school districts and mental health organizations through the country. So if your district or organization could use some help, get in touch with us via email at info@neurodiversitypodcast.com. Another easy resource is our Facebook group, the Neurodiversity Podcast Advocacy and Support Group. And you'll find links to all of our social media accounts and groups at neurodiversitypodcast.com. Still to come?
I'm Sarah Nannery. I'm Director of Development for Autism Initiatives at Drexel University, and I'm also autistic.
And I'm Larry Nannery, and throughout the book we wrote together, I gave all my 2 cents.
In just a minute.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
I'm not a non-autistic person with a side of autism that can be treated or wished away or rewarded or punished away. I am a completely autistic person. Autism is central to my being. But the thing is, me saying I am autistic is a reclamation of something that ended up being used as a slur or something that was negative. And it's important for the stigma and the shame to be taken away from that.
That's episode 85. Look for it in your favorite podcast app.
Today we're talking to Sarah and Larry Nannery. They are the co-authors of the book, What to Say Next: Successful Communication in Work, Life, and Love with Autism Spectrum Disorder. So Sarah and Larry, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having us.
So Sarah, let's start with you. So you were diagnosed as autistic as an adult, which led you to, it sounds like, kind of just this better understanding of yourself and ultimately this book. So share with us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed when I was 31, so just a couple of years ago, as an adult woman. And it really, it opened up so many things for me that I had known, about myself, but I really didn't have, I didn't have an explanation for. I just had things that I never really could do the way that I wanted to do them, or things that I never really could understand. And I didn't know why until I got the diagnosis. So that was really eye-opening for me, but I'm still the same me, that I was for 30 years. I know myself a little better now.
And you were a couple before you went through that process. How did that influence your relationship?
Yeah, we've been together for almost 10 years now. So this was a good 7 or 8 years into our relationship that I finally got the diagnosis. And it wasn't really until we had our first kid that it really started to come out. But I would say it hasn't changed much. Larry was very supportive in the early years, with my communication style, and we adjusted to each other. I think now what's different is we're able to give each other more grace. We're able to understand each other a little bit better and where we're coming from. And that helps a lot when it comes to potential miscommunications that you can have between neurodiverse folks.
Yeah, what I would say is Sarah's still the same shy person, and you come to our bookshelves, you'll see the chronology of different books and support items that Sarah acquired over the years before reaching the milestone of this diagnosis.
I see a lot of adults now who are coming to this late diagnosis. And I don't want to focus too much on the diagnosis, but I guess part of the reason I'm so interested in this is because I hear so many adults talking about how they went almost all of their lives and then discovered this about themselves. And like you said, it kind of makes everything click. You also mentioned that you have 2 children, correct?
Yes.
And one of them is diagnosed neurodivergent. Was that part of the process of you finding your own diagnosis?
It was, and it wasn't. So, a lot of the stories that I hear similar to you are people my age whose kid gets the diagnosis and then they start looking for it in themselves because they notice, if my kid is doing that, which is the same thing that I used to do when I was a kid, I wonder, for me, we were already down the path of possible autism for me before we started seeing it in our son. So they both happened on a parallel basis. But the reason that we really started down the path was because I had the child and became a parent and a mother on top of the career and the marriage. And that's when it just started to become too much for me to handle without specific supports. So it did come about for me because of having a kid, but in a different way than you've heard before.
I know in the book you share about Larry was kind of, you were kind of like the backup when Sarah was going through a lot of these experiences and talking with people at work. What is it that you feel like made that kind of an automatic process, for you? Because did that just develop over time, or how did that come about?
Sure. So I come from the technology world, and this was a little bit before you all went off to university to get your computer degrees. So I've always been the youngest person running meetings, explaining technology. I had some interns in my 20s and into my 30s. So I've just naturally come from a place where I'm comfortable explaining and talking through things and saying, well, this is a widget and this is what it means to the programmer and this is what it means to the business person. So with Sarah, it was just a very natural, you have this situation, I can interpret it. I see things a little bit differently than most for whatever reason that is. And it just became what we would talk about in the evenings. And pretty soon it was what we were talking about over instant message during lunchtime. And well, gee, I'm talking to my, at that time, girlfriend, and we're having a good relationship and it's not going 10 hours without talking. It's not the worst thing ever. So we ran with it.
Yeah. Dave, who produces the podcast, is my husband, and we did a lot of IMing as well. and well, even now, currently, I think it's convenient, if I'm at the office and we can kind of fire off some messages, but, just even checking in and talking about those things. And I loved that. I loved kind of that give and take, that support. And Sarah, for you, as you kind of were navigating this workplace relationship and learning all of the ins and outs, having that as a resource must have been empowering for you in a lot of ways.
It was literally like having a bug in my ear, with somebody talking on the other line, say this next, do this, go here. It was very, very helpful for me to have Larry sort of in my pocket, technically on my desktop computer, but I could run back to the computer and shoot something off like, this thing just happened. What does it mean? I was doing that a lot early on in my career. Since then, we've whittled it down to, maybe a text here or there. We still do it sometimes when something new happens at work. But for the most part, he guided me through that, like, fake it till you make it phase, which I absolutely detested. And I think a lot of people hate, but yeah.
I wanted to quickly share that I, without realizing, set the expectation that she could text me early in our relationship. She was driving down from Vermont and she made a wrong turn and got very, very lost. Called me up and I spent about 45 minutes to the nose, actually not about, 45 minutes to the nose, guiding you through New York traffic, Yonkers and various places to get to me in Queens. And from that moment, she affectionately started calling me Lair. But I think that probably unlocked some comfort, even if you weren't aware of it, that, gee, Larry is going to respond. He's not going to leave me out on an island. So
Right.
I have this question. He's going to just help me out with it.
Mm-hmm.
What was it, Sarah, as you were kind of conceptualizing the book, what brought you to the feeling like this was a resource that people really needed?
So it was very, very convenient for me to have Larry in my pocket. But if I didn't have Larry, I don't know what I would have been able to do. I think that, I looked for so many different resources. I looked, like Larry said, we have books on our shelf, like highly sensitive people and shy and introverted and all these, how to succeed in work and life. And none of them were really written for me. Some of them had tidbits that I could use that were helpful, but most of it I just didn't understand. It was like, trying to read series 2 of a series I hadn't read the first books of. So I was still getting lost. And as we started to think about all of the different things that Larry has helped me learn and talk about them with friends, and our friends were saying, oh, I wish I knew more about that, or I could use advice about small talk, or I don't know about XYZ. And so it became this, we have a lot of learnings over the last 10 years that we could share with people so that other people could have a Larry in their pocket and I don't have to keep him all to myself, because it's been hugely helpful.
I was talking to a mother of neurodivergent kids yesterday, and she was asking specifically about how to help her kids build some communication skills. And I actually used an example from your book of high context conversations, meaning the situation requires a lot of background information and nuanced interpretation of intent, and low context, which are situations or conversations that are very straightforward and clear and thorough. And during this conversation, I could just see this light bulb that clicked on for her as she thought about how she can support her children. And through this, it just really occurs to me that there may be a ton of different ways that neurotypical people would also benefit from understanding the communication challenges of neurodivergent people.
So I think back to when I met Sarah and she was still in college, watching all of the different interactions of professors and students. And, you went to a very liberal college. You went to a college that was about communication and helping people in different countries. The awareness that people speak differently, that they have different experiences, and don't take anything for granted. Don't start with what you know, your prejudices, but rather start with who's on the other side of the table is very profound. And I don't care if it's at the Starbucks, at a Target, at college, at work, just being aware that you are you and they are they. So let's come together, I think is super powerful.
It's funny because, some of the feedback that we're getting about the book, someone who's autistic said, turns out the best book for autistics is actually a book about how neurotypicals communicate. So it really, I think it goes both ways. And we wrote it that way because it's helpful for someone who's neurotypical to get a glimpse inside of a neurodivergent thought process and how much goes on, how much thinking there is, how much analysis, how many details, how much work goes into each tiny interaction that a lot of people who are neurotypical just take for granted, like their brain just does it for them. And my brain, I have to make my brain do it on purpose. So there's a lot more intention that goes on behind what I'm doing. It's a lot more manual. And I think having that perspective of that kind of window in to see what it's like on the inside helps.
I recognize when I'm working with families and I talk to parents how frequently you just forget to start with the basics.
Yes.
I know that there's a lot of talk in the business world about supporting neurodivergent employees and their families. What are some of the suggestions that you think you would want business leaders to hear about how they could make their businesses a more neurodiversity affirming environment?
That's a great question, and something I think that is huge right now. So many employers are becoming aware of the fact that they have neurodiverse employees, that what is it, like 1 in 8 Americans is neurodiverse. So, some of the things that I have found very helpful is and especially now post-COVID, businesses will probably be thinking about this a lot more, having flexibility around my own workspace. So the ability to have some autonomy around what lighting, I have, if I can have a quiet space, something that's a huge open environment with a lot of movement or a lot of noise would be very distracting for me. So, if I had the option of moving to a quieter area, at certain points throughout the day, or if I could work from home, which is a little bit more comfortable in terms of sensory input that I can control, that's one thing. A couple of other things that I have found hugely helpful. I think that there's a lot of emphasis in the workplace right now on like multitasking and everybody trying to get everything done all at once and meeting deadlines. And it's the human brain, any human brain is not built for multitasking like that, super multitasking. So instead of glorifying this, the ability to multitask, help people with prioritizing instead, and build that into kind of your managerial structure and how you help people prioritize, because that's also an issue that I run into and a lot of autistic people do around executive functioning. It's hard for me to figure out how to prioritize. So if I have people who are trained to help me with prioritizing, and then I don't have to worry about trying to multitask, which is just a nightmare for a lot of neurodivergent folks, as well as neurotypical people. And then, the other piece of it is when it comes to social engagement at work, this is where like the office party or the holiday party is supposed to be a time when coworkers can like relax a little bit. And for neurodiverse colleagues, it might be the most stressful time. So just keeping that in mind, mixing social and work can be a stressful environment for people who are neurodiverse. Not that we don't want to, not that I don't want to go to the office party or I don't want to have social relationships at work, but having certain structure around them is helpful. So, I've been part of lunch and learns, which are helpful. It's like you can go and have lunch with your colleagues around a specific topic. That can help. So having some of those more structured social engagements is helpful as well.
Yeah.
Knowing the staff themselves, some people like repetitive tasks. And I'll go all the way back to my teenage days running the Looney Tunes Superstore at Magic Mountain. And, we try to rotate where the staff would clean or solve problems or set registers or whatever it is. And I learned even then there were some people that always wanted to go take care of the plush. And, in management meetings, they'd say, well, everyone should do their fair share. Their fair share is the plush was really painful and most people didn't want to do it. So they were champions for taking on that task. And I was like, let's embrace them. Let's not persecute and move them around and say, you have to go do this other menial thing when, we're a team here. So know your people, know your person would be really helpful.
That's such a good example. It reminds me of someone who I was talking to recently, and he's a neurodivergent high school student and has a job at a grocery store. And so he's a bagger, right? But they have a rotation that they have to do, bagging or bringing in the carts. Well, nobody wants to bring in the carts, but he loves to bring in the carts because he likes the pacing, he likes the movement. It's, I think that's kind of a stim for him, like that's comforting. But he doesn't also then know how to communicate that to, I'm like, well, let's figure out how you can talk to your managers. Why wouldn't they want you to switch? Like, what difference? Who cares as long as it's getting done? What about parenting? How does your awareness of neurodiversity, big picture and little picture, microcosm of the family, how does that influence how you parent and communicate with your child?
our son Cyrus is autistic. I'm autistic. We're extremely different, and we also have a lot of similarities. So, I have to be a little bit careful because I can sometimes project myself and my experience into what he's experiencing, and it's not necessarily going to be the same for him. That said, I do have a lot of insight into what could be going on inside his brain when the words aren't coming out, or when, something is going on. A quick example I'll share is when he was 2.5, maybe. This is like pre lots of words. He was still had just a few words, and it was wintertime and we were getting ready to go out, and he was refusing point blank to put his coat on. And finally I was able to just kind of get him to a calm place and try and find out why. It's not because he doesn't want to go outside. It's not because he's wanting to be stubborn. It was because there was a specific sensory thing happening with the sleeves of the jacket and the neck. And so he said the word hard, and he pointed to his neck. And we were able to figure out that it was the coat that was bothering him. So we layered up with a couple of other coats that were softer and got out the door just fine. So, but if we hadn't known that there could be a sensory issue happening, or that he didn't have the right words in place, we could have had a big battle about that coat and gone on forever, or maybe never made it outside. So it is helpful to have that knowledge that there could be something else going on.
Routines are wonderful until routines are not wonderful. Bedtime routines, they are great. But if he doesn't have to use the bathroom, well, what does that mean in terms of his process? Or whatever the case is, you can have steps 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 ready to go. But if that first step that day goes off or is different because it's warmer than you expected, or whatever that expectation is, you can have chaos. So a lot of times my go-to move is, everybody wait, put your hands up. Let's figure out where we are. Let's take just 2 minutes and find where that first step is. And then routine 2 through 8, how he flips his jacket on, how he helps to open the door, all of those things, they go smoothly. But you can't be so locked into your routine that you miss a general observation.
Mm-hmm.
How old is Cyrus now?
He's 5 now.
So it sounds like you're involving Cyrus in the problem-solving process, and that is helping. How can parents help their kids feel like they have a say in what happens in their lives?
Well, I would just say, I think something that helped a lot, especially when he was 3, 4, was the book Raising Your Spirited Child, which doesn't have much to do necessarily specifically with neurodivergence, however, is written with a lot of, I think, could apply to a lot of kids who are neurodivergent. But it's really just, spirited in terms of more intense and more perceptive and more, detail-oriented than other kids might be, which Cyrus definitely was. And I think, one of the things that came out of reading that book was treating your child, they're a human being just as much as you are, and they have their own world happening in their head. And so to be able to get to a point, and this is where so I have a master's degree in conflict transformation, getting to that needs-based center. I need for you to put on your coat so that you stay warm when we're going outside because it's cold. And then, he needs to make sure that he's comfortable in his coat, or, whatever that need is that is underneath the conflict. So if you can get to that point where the child is able to communicate what that basic need is, then you can both work together to find a solution.
What's the top 5 things that you recommend? I hear that question often. And on the playground, the best advice I've ever given, that we always give, is get yourself one of those devices that you speak to. And I don't want to set off everyone's device right now, but the ones that you say the name and give a command. Mm-hmm. And from very early on, we said, hey, device, set timer X minutes, and created a third party. We trust the device is going to be successful. And for Cyrus with his neurodiversity, that was super wonderful. And pretty soon he was setting the timers and the alarms. For some of his friends and peers that aren't on the spectrum, that don't have some of these traits, you know what? They still like to talk to that device and set a command and pretend that they're in charge for a minute. And, the need of the parent that, hey, in 5 minutes we're going to go is still met. And the kid has some buy-in. So it's probably a good thing for everybody.
Mm-hmm. As we wrap up our conversation, I'm curious, if you were able to talk to somebody who is where you were at the beginning of this journey, what would you tell them? What just basic advice or words of wisdom would you share?
I want to go first here because something we developed and learned and now we're thrilled about is Sarah and I, we don't compromise with each other. We support each other. We know what each other likes and don't likes. And I know Sarah loathes to make decisions, but I know the types of food Sarah likes. So I don't say, hey, what are we going to go have for dinner tonight? I might say, are you in the mood for Chinese? And if she says yes, great. And if not, I'm ordering pizza and she's happy and I'm happy. And we kind of apply that now throughout our relationship. I cook. Sarah does the dishes. Sarah never cooks. I don't feel slighted. And you know what? We're both very happy and well fed. So, if we could have understood that even earlier on, I think that would be really beneficial. As long as the sum is 100 and you both are happy, it's going to work out well. And don't keep score.
So much of what you learn, growing up, when you're thinking about what your life is going to be like, is that when you find your partner, it has to be 50-50. It's like both sides come to the table with half. And sometimes it's going to be 70-30, and sometimes it's going to be, it's going to be a balance that makes sense to you both. And, we talk in the book about equity versus equality. It doesn't have to be exactly equal all the time in order to feel equitable. It's playing to each other's strengths. And I think, one of the biggest things that has helped me and would have helped me earlier is just knowing to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, because especially somebody like me, I get so lost in the details and the specifics. And if one thing goes wrong, then everything is wrong. And life goes on, and life is amazing. And there's so much more out there. And so taking that moment to really find out that bigger picture of why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why am I going through the pain that this is right now? Because, being together with another human being can be painful sometimes. But it's worth it. It's about what that bigger picture is and why you're doing it together.
Sarah and Larry Nannery, authors of What to Say Next, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Code switching is the term for when someone has to use a certain type of language in one environment, but then switch to a different style of communication in another environment. Kids code switch when they go from talking with their friends to talking with adults. Culturally and linguistically diverse people do it when they move between environments. And almost all of us code switch to some extent when we move from our personal to our professional lives. For some of us, that code switching comes naturally and we learn it as we navigate those various situations. However, for some others, it doesn't come quite so automatically. Sarah was able to recognize when she would get stuck in situations and wanted to figure out the best way to understand others' meaning. The straightforward advice Larry provided, plus the ideas Sarah includes in her book, are like the Rosetta Stone for those of us who missed some of those messages along the way. When I work with families, I often feel like an interpreter between neurotypical and neurodivergent languages. And when I help everyone break down their communication without the assumptions of what everyone thinks the others mean, it's much easier to find a resolution. One important note, this is a two-way street. As we work to advocate for understanding, acceptance, and accommodations for neurodivergent folks in our world, we need to normalize asking for clarification. We need to eliminate judgment when someone misunderstands. And we need to realize that communication differences are not insurmountable. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Our thanks to Sarah and Larry Nannery. You can learn more about them through the links on the episode page at neurodiversitypodcast.com. You'll also find a link to their book, What to Say Next: Successful Communication in Work, Life, and Love with Autism Spectrum Disorder. Also, thanks to our Patreon patrons who make small monthly contributions to help defray the expense of producing this podcast. Go to our website and click support if you can join them. Every dollar adds up, but sharing our podcast with a friend is a great way to help as well. For Emily, this is executive producer Dave Morris saying thanks for listening. Stay safe. Stay healthy. See you next time. This is a production of Morris Creative Services.